this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
There's a difference between liking a house and actually getting it. Redfin is built to make up that difference and close the gap between finding and owning the home for you. Redfin agents close twice as many deals as other agents. So when you find a home you love, you're not a step behind when it comes to making an offer. That means less watching great homes disappear and more focus on the one you'll call home. Redfin helps turn saved listings into real addresses. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Discover a spectacular island destination with crystal blue seas, endless sunshine, and the cool Bahamian breeze. Baha Mar, located in Nassau, Bahamas, offers your choice of 3 luxury hotels: the richly refined Rosewood, the playfully hip SLS, and the stylishly modern Grand Hyatt. With over 45 restaurants, bars, and lounges, Baha Mar serves up delicious dining from world-renowned chefs like Daniel Boulud and Marcus Samuelson. Nightlife venues like the new John Batiste Jazz Club and the Caribbean's most luxurious casino. At Baha Mar, you'll find every pleasure under the sun and one-of-a-kind experiences for the entire family, like Baha Bay, our 15-acre lush tropical water park, interactive wildlife experiences, including our daily flamingo parade, world-class golf, tennis, spa, and so much more. Visit bahamar.com today and discover a vacation destination where memories are made for a lifetime. Baha Mar. Life spectacular.
Studies show that 100% of everybody in the world wants to curl up indoors and do nothing because it's so darn cold out there. That's why many people are turning to Bombas, whose pillowy plush slippers and warm merino wool socks have been said to be the most comfortable in the history of feet. Bombas products have been found to boost coziness by up to 1,000,000%. Okay, enough fake statistics, but could Bombas socks and slippers really be the cure? Go to bombas.com/audio and use code AUDIO for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com and use code AUDIO.
This is Jana Kramer from Wind Down with Jana Kramer. We talk a lot about cutting out toxicity in our lives, but what about our skincare? So many of these anti-aging companies hide hundreds of chemicals under the term fragrance, exposing us to harmful carcinogens that actually damage our skin. Foria Organics is completely different. They use natural Arctic ingredients like arnica that lock in moisture, boost collagen, and repair your skin's protective barrier, giving you a radiant natural glow at any age. Stop using harsh products that work against your skin instead of with it. Visit ForiaOrganics.com today.
What's taking shitloads of meth? My Hitler! I'm Robert Evans. This is Behind the Bastards, the podcast where we tell you everything you don't know about the worst people in all of history. Or in the case of today's episode, stuff that you think you know, but you actually don't know the specifics in the way that you probably think you do. Maybe. Anyway,
that was definitely top 10 intros to this podcast.
Thank you, Sophie.
You're welcome.
Sophie Lichterman, my producer and legally boss. And my guest today, I would like to introduce the wonderful Carolina Barlow. Carolina, you are a writer and a co-host of the Ron Burgundy podcast and the True Romance podcast. Carolina?
Yes.
Is Will Ferrell nice in person?
He is a toxic overlord. Will Ferrell is actually the nicest person I've ever met in my life. He's nicer than I think most members of my family and yours. I'm just assuming.
No, I think you're accurate.
Knowing how kind he is. And he's a Sophie, you can speak to this.
He Frenched my dog.
How does his hair smell?
Okay, this is a great question because Bill is very good at grooming and he always smells really nice. His skincare is amazing. And I believe he may still be using this product, but once we were on a press tour with Mark Wahlberg, who is using a lot of a brand called Moroccan oil.
Yes.
Which you can buy. this is not an ad, but you can buy it pretty much anywhere. Will decided, wait, I'm messing up the story.
Okay.
Will was uses a brand called Moroccan oil. And Mark Wahlberg was obsessed with it. And so we ended up talking about it a lot on a press tour. And Moroccan Oil then sent us a bunch of Moroccan oil. So I believe he still uses that. But it smells incredible.
Okay, well, this is actually a lot more information than I expected. Welcome to the Celebrity Corner, where we talk about how different celebrities' hair smells. Next up, Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
So funny.
No, we're talking about we are talking about a celebrity
like
today.
Yeah, he's surrounded by babies, so probably like piss and shit.
Piss and shit all the time. That scans completely, actually.
Yeah.
You know who else?
Changing a diaper. I totally forgot.
You know who else smelled like shit?
Oh, this is so accurate.
And is a celebrity.
I don't like
Adolf
that.
Hitler.
I don't like that title for him.
He is a celebrity. He's a very famous man, arguably more famous than any living celebrity.
I'm not gonna give Hitler a celebrity title.
You can say a lot of bad things about the man, but he has brand recognition.
Okay, fair enough. So we're like going from polar opposites. We're talking about one of
Madonna or Cher. You don't even need last names.
Exactly, just Hitler.
You're just going from like the nicest person ever of Will Ferrell to the worst person ever to Adolf Hitler so quick.
Well, he's also, his name's kind of been a verb because you can like, I don't know about y'all, but like when my friends are being shitty, I'm like, you're kind of Hitlering right now. You're getting a little Hitler on all of us here. Maybe calm down. So he's like, he's like Google.
Any of my friends have been done something so shitty that I would spring that name
Fair
on
enough.
them.
Well, this one time my buddy Mike annexed the Sudetenland and we got pretty pissed at him.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's apt.
Carolina, how do you feel about drugs?
Drugs. I don't do drugs because when I was young, I did them too much and then I had to stop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm actually in the same boat. I drink sometimes and take kratom, but my doing illegal drugs days are long, long behind me because I damaged my brain too much.
Right.
What have you heard about the Nazis and drugs?
I know that they did a lot of them. And I think World War II, much like the Civil War, was a pretty crazy time. And Vietnam. Wars generally and drugs actually tend to mix well together.
Absolutely. It's a great time to get wasted when you're at a war zone. I can say that from experience. And, you know, it's also there's in 2016, a German novelist and a screenwriter, a guy named Norman Ohler, published a work of historic nonfiction. In the United States, it was released under the title Blitzed, Drugs in Nazi Germany. A lot of people have heard of this book. It was an international, but it was a huge, huge fucking book. I'm going to guess most of the people listening to the episode right now either heard of it or you read some article that was based on kind of the media campaign around this, because literally every major news website and magazine on the fucking planet published interviews with this guy, or at least kind of like write-ups that were summarizing the book. The Guardian's article during this period is kind of emblematic of the whole. It was titled Hi Hitler, which is a fun title, nice little play on Heil Hitler. And it's also really appropriate because the reason Hitler was getting high was for his health, and Heil Hitler literally means health to Hitler. But anyway, that's a point Ohler makes. I'm going to read a nice little pun. It is a nice little pun. I'm going to read a sample paragraph from that article talking about Ohler's work. The book in question is The Total Rush, or to use its superior English title, Blitzed, which reveals the astonishing and hitherto largely untold story of the Third Reich's relationship with drugs, including cocaine, heroin, morphine, and above all, methamphetamines, and of their effect not only on Hitler's final days. The Führer, by Ohler's account, was an absolute junkie with ruined veins by the time he retreated to the last of his bunkers, but on the Wehrmacht's successful invasion of France in 1940. Published in Germany last year, where it became a bestseller, it has since been translated into 18 languages, a fact that delights Ohler but also amazes him. And this is interesting. I'm starting not kind of the way we normally do by just sort of giving the history, but by talking about this book because it is so prominent. And in the years that I've been doing Behind the Bastards, I've probably had a couple of hundred different people email me or ask me, sometimes in person, if I've read Blitzed and tell me that I ought to do an episode on Hitler's drug addiction. And this is that episode, but I have to tell you, a decent chunk of this is actually going to be kind of critiquing Blitzed and more broadly critiquing kind of how the media presented it. And I want to clarify up top, I don't think Blitzed is a bad book or that Ohler is a bad guy. I think his work is in some ways a victim of his own success. success. If you start Googling around permutations of phrases like Hitler's drug addiction or drugs in Nazi Germany or the Nazis and meth, about 70% of the search results you see are going to be articles based on Norman's book, kind of rewriting the same thing over and over again. And this makes his book fairly unique in the field of Nazi studies. The Third Reich is the single most widely studied and written about regime in political history. There are governments on the planet right now who have produced to date less documentation for their government bureaucracy than there is historic works written about the Third Reich. No other government has had more scholars devote their lives to examining it, and no state has had so many pages of quality historical writing dedicated to its history. And when we include the great minds who've written about the Third Reich throughout history, we quickly become clogged with genius. There's William Shirer, Ian Kershaw, John Toland, Volker Ulrich, Richard Evans, and Hannah Arendt, just to name a few. And the fact that in 5 years, Norman Ohler has become one of the most recognized writers in Nazi history is due to the subject matter of his book. Namely, people like drugs and people are fascinated by the Nazis. And if you combine those two things, you're going to sell a lot of fucking books. And one of the reasons this frustrates some historians is that some of the stuff that Ohler wrote about had been well documented before he came into the picture. For example, Pervitin, which is the methamphetamine that the Nazis primarily took. A lot of scholars wrote about the use of Pervitin by Nazis during the Blitzkrieg. Where Ohler broke new ground was in making a detailed study about the personal notes and professional journals of a guy named Dr. Theodor Morell, who was one of Hitler's personal physicians and his primary dope dealer. Morell was not an unknown quantity to historians previously, but Ohler spends a lot of time digging into precisely what he gave Hitler and how it may have impacted history. Half of the controversy among historians about Blitz revolves around the language used in this book. Ohler is not a historian. He's not a scholar. He's writing in a pop nonfiction cadence and vocabulary. So this is closer to a guy like, who's that fucking guy everybody hates now, but everybody loved for a while? I wrote The Tipping Point. Malcolm Gladwell. I'm not saying he's like, because I think he's much more responsible than Malcolm Gladwell. But he's closer to the Gladwell end of the spectrum, that kind of pop nonfiction, than he is to a scholar like Ian Kershaw, you know? And that frustrates scholars because his work has been so influential, right? You get kind of pissed off when like you do detailed, painstaking analyses of these guys, and then some dude kind of throws out a book that maybe exaggerates some things and uses some like flagrant language and is much more popular than any work by a scholar will ever be. That frustrated people. And, you know, I don't think that means it's not, there is good scholarship in this, and there's in fact groundbreaking scholarship in this. Ian Kershaw, who's probably the single most prominent biographer of Hitler alive today, called this a serious work of scholarship and praised it. Richard Evans, on the other hand, who's also very well respected, hated this book. So it's not like there's not, I don't want to come across as saying there's an agreement among scholars that this book is bad or that there's an agreement that it's good. I tend to think it did more good than harm. But it was written to appeal to the masses and be a popular book, and it absolutely is. Now, the other half of the controversy around Blitz revolves around some of the more serious issues with the way Ohler presents his research. Namely, he suffers from the same problem most people do when they zero in on a very specific aspect of the Nazi regime. He's gotten so into the weeds on this topic that he lends it weight that's sometimes disproportionate to its actual. The same thing happens to people studying like the occult and Nazis, right? Because there is like a really fascinating history of like esoteric Hitlerism, of like of occult Nazism, but it also wasn't nearly as influential as the people who write books about it put it on as. And in fact, by like 1941, it was pretty much out of any kind of influence in the party. But, you know, if that's your thing, you're going to seek to kind of Hellboy things up a little, you know?
So this is like a long-winded way of saying it's debatable?
No, it's a long way of trying to like give caveats about like what are, not saying it's a bad book, but saying it's a good book that I think because he's so focused on the drugs tends to ignore other reasons for some of the behavior that he's outlining that are not drugs. Yeah.
I wonder if it's dangerous. This is me speaking without reading the book. I think it may be dangerous to blame anything on drug use.
I don't think that is the chief criticism the historians that dislike him make. And he's actually pretty careful. He's careful in his book to say, like, I am not saying Hitler's horrible crimes are the result of these drugs. Because one of the things he does, he points out, as we'll go into, most of the hardcore drug abuse from Hitler started in the 40s, you know, when he had already set everything in motion that he was going to set in motion.
His ideals were already pretty clear. The Reichstag was going down.
Yeah. But he's saying, like, it's worth noting if a guy is fucked up on meth and cocaine and opium all of the time, and he's a warlord, it's worth wondering, like, how does that impact his decision-making process? Which I think is a fair question, right? Like, obviously, there is a danger when you do that, but it's also, I don't think that means you shouldn't look at, like, well, what was this doctor shooting into the veins of this man making these incredibly influential decisions? It's the same way that, like, it's worth looking at how the methamphetamine JFK took impacted his decision-making during the Cuban Missile Crisis and shit, right? Like, it is.
Or Trump and his Adderall problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or Trump and Adderall. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not like, I don't want to, I agree that's a worry, but I also don't think we should be like, well, let's not talk about this just because some people will fuck it up, you know?
I guess I'm implying more that leaning into it too hard, giving it too much weight. I can see it distracting from a serious threat that was definitely worsened by drugs. I mean, it's interesting. Vietnam, towards the end of Vietnam, all the soldiers, American soldiers, were getting really messed up on all of the kinds of pills that were just very prevalent in the 60s and 70s, like Quaaludes, Black Beauties, speed, anything to keep them up. And it increased a lot of paranoia, especially when there's an enemy that, you know, quote unquote enemy, Viet Cong, who aren't in uniforms. Your paranoia can increase. It could make you more violent. With or without these drugs, the Vietnam War is still inherently a crime against humanity. But drugs don't help.
Yeah,
it doesn't help.
And there's a question too with the Nazis, right? Where you don't want to, like, a lot of these Wehrmacht soldiers were going days without sleeping and taking shitloads of methamphetamine, and some of them committed horrible atrocities. You don't want to, like, the atrocities, number one, were often ordered by people who were certainly not drugged out of their minds and were planned pretty extensively ahead of time. That said, the fact that a lot of these guys are on meth and, like, flipping out and burning down villages, some of that's probably due to the fact that they're fucked up on methamphetamine, right? Like, the fact, not necessarily like the concerted genocide actions where they're shooting 40,000 people in a day, but like, oh yeah, they get shot at by a partisan and they burn down a village. Yeah, maybe that's some guys who are tweaked out on speed like flipping out in the same way that, like, yeah, maybe it had an impact. I think you can say that. I think you can want to know, okay, well, you have millions of men going days without sleeping, heavily armed and taking methamphetamine. I bet that has an influence on their behavior, without saying the Nazis killed millions of Russian civilians because they were on meth, which is not the case. They killed millions of Russian civilians because the war from the beginning was a genocidal crusade. I don't know. I don't want to like veer away from what is an interesting question just because people can simplify it to the extent that it gets fucked up, you know, because I do think this is a fascinating question. We're going to be talking a lot about Oehler's findings here, because I do agree with Ian Kershaw, who described it as a serious piece of scholarship. He goes into, he's not just cutting up other bits of reporting. He looks at a lot of original primary sources. He's combing through, in a way I don't think anyone else ever did, Dr. Theodore Morell's, Hitler's primary physician's notes in exhaustive detail, researching the medicines he's given. There's a lot of very important scholarship, I think, in his findings. But I also will be laying out some areas where Oehler's conclusions do not gel with the actual evidence, and there are some points there. So let's start by talking about drug culture in Weimar Germany. As a refresher, the Weimar government was a progressive democracy that followed after the Kaiser's monarchy went away and was eventually eaten up by Hitler. For like the 15 or so years it existed, Weimar was a dizzyingly progressive government for its time. Berlin became a magnet for the LGBT community and the site of the very first serious research on healthcare for trans people. Art and music flourished, and as you'd expect from a city full of bohemian artists and musicians, people were getting fucked up all the time. Like, I mean, just real
Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
Yeah, exactly. Like real creative drug use. Because like Berlin is, what places like chunks of New York and chunks of California became in the 60s and 70s. Berlin is that in the fucking 20s, and this put Berlin
there's great photographs you can find of Berlin in the 20s where people are in drag. It's very casual. It's actually completely, there's a flamboyant, like fun, roaring 20s quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating time to study. And this put, one of the things that I think is critiquable at Oehler is when he's talking about drug use in Germany, he focuses heavily on Berlin, and the Berlin, hella drug use, but also Berlin's drug use is in direct contrast to what's going on in the rest of Germany. Not only was most of Germany much more socially conservative, think about like Portland, Oregon versus its surrounding areas, right? But the use of recreational drugs like cocaine was markedly uncommon in Germany and not even particularly common in Berlin, as we'll talk about. It's worth noting that at this time, most Germans across the country would not have considered tobacco or alcohol drugs. So when we're talking about drug use, those are not drugs to Germans in the 20s. That's like milk to them. Both were so ubiquitous that they were considered to be a part of a person's diet. And interestingly enough, both communist and Nazi leaders in Europe at this time hated tobacco. Lenin was famously anti-cigarette.
Right.
So was Hitler. Obviously, Lenin's anti-cigarette shit didn't last once, because Stalin loved him some smoking, and Hitler hated cigarettes, but there was never really any sort of, they both, like, he had to kind of accept, like, well, I'm not going to get Germans to stop smoking. Like, that's not going to happen.
They were in the hardcore scene.
Yeah, they were both kind of, he was definitely kind of straight edge. Yeah. We'll talk about this more later, but for the most part throughout the 20s, Nazis and communists smoked and drank about as much as everybody else. So again, while there's Nazi and communist leaders who are being like, no, you need to struggle towards revolution and be sober for that, most communists, most Nazis are getting drunk and chain smoking like anybody else. And so when we talk about drugs in Germany, what I mean by drugs is hard stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine, as well as opiates. Germany was actually the world leader in drug manufacturing at this time.
Yes,
Morphine. Bayer, exactly. Morphine had first been isolated by a German chemist in the early 1800s. It was rediscovered, patented, and mass-produced by Bayer in 1898. By the end of World War I, morphine was the number one product of the entire German pharmaceutical industry. They were shipping this stuff out everywhere, because it's the most addictive thing in the world.
The company that owned that first manufacturing plant in Germany was the Sacklers, later responsible for the opioid epidemic we're currently facing in the United States.
Good people.
Yeah, we've talked about them a lot.
Yeah, there's some other Bayer products made during the Nazi regime that we could talk about too.
Yeah.
Like heroin?
Yeah.
Like straight up heroin they advertised as lighter than morphine.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this shit is OTC in Germany at the time, right? And Bayer is the first to produce and sell heroin. And actually, heroin stays over the counter in Germany until like the 1950s.
Wow.
Which, to live in those times. To just be able to walk down to the corner store and get a big fat bag of horse, smoke it, and I don't know. Doesn't really matter what you do.
Go to the movies.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what you're doing when you're smoking heroin. Yeah. So now, by a lot of this point, heroin has become like illegal in the U.S. and a lot of Asia. At least if you're taking it, like you can't just go and get it over the counter, right? Maybe it's more prescribed than it was now, but it was not like you couldn't just walk in and buy it as a person. But you can in Germany, and so Germany, since everything's kind of legal there, becomes the nexus for an international gray and black market drug trade in heroin. And these German Swiss companies will kind of use Germany as a base and they're not directly selling it illegally underground in countries, but they're putting it in position to be sold that way, and they're profiting from it. I'm going to quote from a write-up by a scholar named Jonathan Levy here. Both morphine and heroin were consumed in Germany during the Weimar years in the Third Reich, though morphine was far more popular than its more potent cousin, perhaps explaining Merck's decision to cease its diacetylmorphine program. The number of addicts in Germany is difficult to ascertain. Like many drug statistics, the reported numbers of addicts are mere guesstimates rather than reliable figures, mainly because it is next to impossible to differentiate between addicts and users. Now, the best evidence seems to suggest that the rate of opiate addiction in Germany increased from the start of the war years, and by that I mean World War I, until about 1922, which is probably caused by the same thing that drives a lot of opiate use in the U.S. today, which is wounded soldiers getting hooked on it, right? Getting prescribed as much of it as they want and having, developing a problem. But
huge problem in the Civil War, too.
Yeah. Every time a lot of men get wounded. Yeah.
Soldiers got hooked on it. I mean, it's funny you say guesstimate because I'm just reading that Sackler book everyone's reading, and they said the estimate was 250,000 soldiers in the United States hooked on morphine, and that even Theodore Roosevelt basically created a position for someone to fight this quote unquote epidemic.
Yeah, I mean that completely makes sense, especially when it is like as available as it was, when you can just bump down to the street and buy it. Why wouldn't you take a bunch of heroin? Now, by 1931, though, the rate of addiction seems to have fallen in Germany. Obviously, none of our data is perfect, but it may have just been a matter of enough time had passed since the war. People had recovered enough. Some of them had probably died. One leader in the Reich Health Office at that point estimated that there were just 0.3 male addicts per 10,000 people in Germany, which is probably nonsense. But he also noted that 1 in 100 doctors were addicts. And this is probably a much more accurate number, in part because a lot of these guys have been prosecuted for this, and in part because today we know that doctors are at a massively elevated risk of particularly opiate addiction, right?
Including
same thing with
pharmacists,
nurses,
right?
Yeah, doctors, pharmacists, and nurses. I've talked to a nurse with a drug addiction who was pinching, opiates and shit for quite a long while, and it's it's hard to avoid, especially given the trauma that you encounter as a healthcare worker. Why wouldn't you want to be high on fucking oxy all the time?
Right.
I get it. Mm-hmm. It's not good behavior if people's lives are in your hand, but I can empathize with the need to dole that. Yeah. Especially since, I don't know, none of us we've all decided not to do the pandemic mitigation thing anymore. So right. I don't know.
And we're paying more taxes than Jeff Bezos as a nurse in Arizona.
Yeah. So take some oxy. I'm not gonna yell at you.
Right.
Now, cocaine was also a drug with a German origin. It was synthesized first from coca leaves by German chemists and popularized by a Viennese psychiatrist named Dr. Sigmund Freud and a Viennese eye doctor named Karl Kohler. Freud prescribed cocaine as part of his talk therapy sessions, and Dr. Kohler just poured it right into people's eyes as a local anesthetic, which is, man, imagine going to the eye doctor and, all right, I'm going to pour some cocaine in your eyes. Keep them open. This shit's strong as ass.
My therapist, Kathy,
shout out.
If before I was about to talk to her about stalking people on social media and how it was affecting my mental health, she poured some cocaine into my eyes. I can't say how that would affect our sessions.
I think they'd be radder.
I think
they'd go by really quickly.
They would go by very quickly, yeah.
And I would need a gallon of water to help my dry mouth.
Yes.
Look, as far as I am aware, cocaine is a drug without downsides. So I don't see why people shouldn't take a shitload of it. It's good for your heart.
For a second, I thought you were sincere.
I've heard it has the ability to reduce nasal problems. Cleans you out real good.
This is
and you
not
can shit
accurate.
for the next 2 days.
Yeah.
For legal reasons, no. Continue.
You know what? It is time for an ad break, and Behind the Bastards is sponsored by the global cocaine industry.
We are not. Yes.
Behind the Bastards. If you like podcasts, you'll love cocaine.
Discover a spectacular island destination with crystal blue seas, endless sunshine, and the cool Bahamian breeze. Baha Mar, located in Nassau, Bahamas, offers your choice of 3 luxury hotels, over 45 fine dining and nightlife venues, Jean Baptiste's all-new jazz club, the Caribbean's most luxurious casino, and one-of-a-kind experiences for the entire family, like our 15-acre tropical water park, wildlife sanctuary, world-class golf course, and so much more. Visit bahamar.com today.
This is Jana Kramer from Wind Down with Jana Kramer. We talk a lot about cutting out toxicity in our lives, habits, jobs, relationships, but what about our skincare? So many of these anti-aging companies out there actually hide hundreds of chemicals under the term fragrance, exposing us to harmful carcinogens that actually break down your skin's protective barrier. Froya Organics is a Scandinavian skincare company that does things differently. They believe in healing skin at a microbial level, not just cheap fillers. They use wild harvested Arctic botanicals like arnica and sea buckthorn. These plants survive extremely harsh winters, making them super resilient and hyper-packed with nutrients. They work with your skin to lock in moisture, boost collagen, and even repair your skin barrier, giving your skin a healthy radiance you can literally see and feel. And it actually works. 92% of users reported seeing less wrinkles and fine lines in just 4 weeks. It's time to stop using harsh chemicals and switch to natural ingredients that give your skin what it needs most. Go and check out FroyaOrganics.com today and get 40% off your order.
Hi, this is Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back and we're celebrating the cocaine industry.
You're not.
An industry with no problems.
Not true.
So more PR.
Yeah.
We're only hearing one side of the story.
Exactly. People talk a lot about all the deaths, all the murders, all the violence, all the death squads funded by cocaine exports. People never talk about the humble movie producers railing cocaine off of the back of each other's iPhones in the bathroom of a club. Yeah, Martin Scorsese. Ever heard of him?
Movies?
Right? Another person who never did anything problematic. Cocaine. Thank you.
Robert.
Now, we were just talking about how Dr. Sigmund Freud and Dr. Karl Kohler were heavily responsible with popularizing cocaine in Germany. And both guys are Jewish. This is relevant because cocaine takes off as the Nazis are rising to and then getting into power. And so the Nazis condemn cocaine as a Jewish drug, corrupting pure Aryan bodies, right? They are not fans of cocaine. And this is why they can't really come after opiates, right? And they don't. They have these kind of, they kind of approach it as a public health problem, but they can't condemn opiate users because a lot of opiate users are soldiers. And there's this, you have to worship veterans in this period of time, especially if you're the Nazis. But cocaine, that's the drug that, the artists and the queer people and the fucking psychiatrists are doing. You can demonize cocaine, and they do. So Berlin decadence was a major topic of complaint for the Nazis, and the city was a hive of all things rad. There were illegal dance parties, not dissimilar to raves. There were infamous clubs like the Bauhaus Resi, which was kind of like the Studio 54 of its time. It was a place people would meet and fuck and do lots of cocaine. Since prostitution and drug use was more or less legal in Berlin, tourists from the United States would often travel there to fuck and snort themselves silly. In Blitzed, Oler cites the lyrics of a contemporary song to set the mood of the time. And I don't know what the tune of this song was, but it's a good song. Once, not so very long ago, sweet alcohol, that beast, brought warmth and sweetness to our lives, but then the price increased, and so cocaine and morphine Berliners now select. Let lightning flashes rage outside, we snort and we inject. At dinner in the restaurant, the waiter brings the tin of coke for us to feast upon, forget whiskey and gin. Let drowsy morphine take its subcutaneous effect. Upon our nervous system, we snort and we inject. These medications aren't allowed, of course, they're quite forbidden, but even such illicit treats are very seldom hidden. Euphoria awaits us, and though, as we suspect, our foes can't wait to shoot us down, we snort and we inject. And if we snort ourselves to death or into the asylum, our days are going downhill fast, how better to beguile 'em? Europe's a madhouse anyway, no need for genuflecting. The only way to paradise is snorting and injecting.
That's very fun, and the way you read it made it sound like you were reading a children's book.
Yeah, it would be a good children's book. And it makes sense. This is happening as the first kind of anti-drug laws are being pushed through. And again, they're not nearly as strict as anything we live with today in the United States, but they're the first. And the Nazis are, they're complaining about drug use, but they're also complaining about degeneracy, about artists, about people who are queer. And those people, the like kind of artistic, intellectual, can see what's coming, and they also can't stop it because they didn't. And that's what the song is about. Is like, well, we're about to get all murdered by the Nazis. Might as well take some heroin.
Right.
Yeah.
It's getting a little, the price is increasing. Alcohol's not cutting it anymore.
Yeah. Time to get, fucked up until the Nazis take total power. Yeah.
Hard to blot out what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will say, somewhat ironically, Oler's focus on Berlin drug culture, the fact that he zeroes in on that so much, kind of focusing less on the rest of Germany, seems to have been heavily influenced by Nazi propaganda in a way that I think does make his overall work a little less accurate. He writes, quote, anyone who could afford it took cocaine, the ultimate weapon for intensifying the moment. Coke spread like wildfire and symbolized the extravagance of the age. On the other hand, it was viewed as a degenerate poison and disapproved of by both communists and Nazis who were fighting for power in the streets. There was violent opposition to the free and easy zeitgeist. German nationalists railed against moral decay, and similar attacks were heard from the conservatives. Though Berlin's new status as a cultural metropolis was accepted with pride, the bourgeoisie, which was losing status in the 1920s, showed its insecurity through its radical condemnation of mass pleasure culture, decried as decadently Western. Now, his work here does a fine job of getting across the way popular German opinion or at least right-wing opinion, saw Berlin and the decadence of its artistic set, but it's also not historically accurate in absolute terms. And to make that point, I want to quote from a paper called The Drug Policy of the Third Reich from the journal Social History of Alcohol and Drugs. Criminal Commissar Ernst Engelbrecht of Berlin claimed in 1924 that cocaine became most popular amongst female and male homosexuals. To him, cocaine was not a problem. It had turned into an epidemic. Yet according to contemporary estimates, the city of Karlsruhe reigned supreme as the center for cocaine consumption with 1.44 grams per thousand people, while Berlin remained second with a consumption rate of 1 gram per thousand people, which is not particularly high. 1924 marked the first German again, there is cocaine. There is this kind of very popular party sect, and the Nazis make a lot of hay of it. But in absolute terms, Berlin isn't consuming a particularly large amount of cocaine. And again, I think this is an area where the fact that the Nazis harped on it so much has Oler focusing on kind of the decadence of Berlin in a way that is kind of falling for their trap, because Berlin itself was not nearly as decadent or drug-addled as the propaganda made it seem, based on the numbers that we actually have.
But the opiate problem it sounds like.
It peaked around, I think, 22, 23. It starts to decline at this. Like, that's kind of the whole point, is that Germany, especially compared to the United States, does not have a particularly big drug problem or drug culture. It's, again, very prominent because a lot of famous people are involved in, like, the set in Berlin that is doing a lot of this. But that's kind of like a subculture in Berlin. It's not the city, and it's not mainstream in Germany. And the fact that the Nazis kind of blow it up into being Berlin is this sin, the hum of, it's kind of like what happens with like Portland, where like the city of Portland's being burnt down every week because the right wing sees a kid break a Starbucks window. That was you, huh? Well, no, I didn't break shit. I didn't see shit.
You're stumbling over your words.
But that's kind of how drug use in Berlin gets painted. And a lot of people still see it in history just because the Nazis made so much hay over the decadence of the city. When the reality is that the vast majority of people in Berlin, if they ever did indulge, weren't doing it all that much.
It's buzzwords. It's like Freud. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, 1924 marked the first major German anti-drug law, which banned the sale of powder cocaine from pharmacies. So didn't make it illegal. You could still get cocaine pretty much legally. You just couldn't buy powdered coke from the pharmacy. And cocaine consumption is estimated to have peaked in 1927 and fallen afterwards. So this is definitely an area where Oehler engages in some counterfactual prose for the sake of making his book more interesting. But that said, his writing does give a decent idea of how the Nazis expressed their rhetoric around drugs. Quote, Jews and drugs merged into a single toxic or epidemiological unit that menaced Germany. For decades, our people have been told by Marxists and Jews, your body belongs to you. That was taken to mean that at social occasions between men or between men and women, any quantities of alcohol could be enjoyed, even at the cost of the body's health. Irreconcilable with this Jewish Marxist view is the Teutonic German idea that we are the bearers of the eternal legacy of our ancestors, and that accordingly our body belongs to the clan and the people. SS Hauptsturmführer, criminal commissar Erwin Kosmel, who was from 1941 director of the Reich Central Office for combating drug transgressions, asserted that Jews play a supreme part in the international drug trade. His work was concerned with eliminating international criminals who often have roots in Jewry. The Nazi Party's Office of Racial Policy claimed that the Jewish character was essentially drug dependent. The intellectual urban Jew preferred cocaine or morphine to calm his constantly excited nerves and give himself a feeling of peace and inner security. Jewish doctors were rumored to be often extraordinarily addicted to morphine. But Oehler rather conveniently ignores the fact that, again, in focusing on this, and those are all things the Nazis said. They definitely, again, harped on Jewish drug use and like this, the scourge of drug addiction and how it's Jewish, has Jewish origins. But immediately before the Nazi seizure of power, the Reich Health Minister wrote, quote, to the knowledge of the Reich Health Office, there is no illicit drug trade in Berlin in a considerable amount as to pose a danger to the public. The circumstances in this respect have changed completely in recent years. And this is 1931. So after 1927, drug use of all kinds declines rapidly. And so by the point the Nazis are in power, there's really not much of a drug problem. And as a result, there's really not much of a drug crackdown. And this is Oehler's main sin in his book, as I see it. He wants to draw a direct line between the modern war on drugs and the Nazi war on drugs. And so he notes that while the central drug law in the Third Reich was a holdover from Weimar Germany, there were new drug regulations put in place when the Nazis took power to further Nazi ideas of racial hygiene. He claims that drug consumption was heavily penalized, starting in 1933 with prison time, and appears to be making the claim that drug users in Nazi Germany were penalized and thrown into concentration camps like other political prisoners and racial minorities. This is something actual scholars who study drug policy in the Third Reich disagree with.
At that point?
While you can find most of it was not, and even so, we'll talk about it, like consumption wasn't really criminalized, and there was at no point were drug users gone after and put in concentration camps in an organized way. And I want to quote from that paper by Jonathan Levy again. Quote, drug use was never a crime in Germany. Thus, habitual drug users or drug addicts were not criminals. Therefore, they were not considered habitual criminals and could not be sent to a concentration camp. So this is, again, in terms of critiquing Oehler, and this is a big chunk of the early part of his book. And it is, there's two parts of this book. There's the part of it where he's doing original research into Hitler's drug use and Hitler's doctrine. And there's a part of it where he's kind of synthesizing a bunch of other historic reports on the Nazis and drugs. And it's that part that, in my opinion, anyway, that's a little bit of a rant on this book, but I think it's important to kind of get this sort of stuff right. And when you
It couldn't be more important to get this stuff right.
Yeah. And Levy is clear that he cannot find, and Levy is a guy who studies specifically Third Reich policies on like drug policies. His conclusion is that there's no evidence that, again, and the Nazis talked a lot about racial hygiene, about how drug use, was a racial problem, but there's no evidence, according to Levy, that Nazi drug policy was impacted by their ideas on racial hygiene. So politicians and like people were saying one thing, but in terms of like what the actual legal changes were, there's just not evidence of that. And I have to think Levy knows his shit on this better than Oler does.
So making drug consumption a crime was really our thing.
Oh yeah, we do the hell out of that shit. I mean, the Germans do now, but
right.
Yeah. And part of why the Nazis really didn't want to go after drug users is because a lot of them were veterans.
Right.
Hermann Goering was a drug-addicted veteran. And the trench generation were idolized. They were nearly worshipped by the Nazis. If you'd focused on junkies and demonizing them, like that would have been bad politics. It's also worth noting that the German penal code established during the Kaiser's Reich was actually, we would consider it wildly progressive on issues of drug addiction compared to the United States. And I'm going to quote from Levy here. Addicts were not responsible for their actions while under the influence of drugs and should receive treatment instead of a jail sentence. Judges often agreed with this position, but were unable to force treatment and were known to set free criminals unfit to stand trial. The protection of drunken and intoxicated criminals existed in the German penal code since its inception. And obviously, that's not a perfect way to do things either, being like, well, you raped somebody, you beat the shit out of somebody, but you were drunk, so get out of here.
They found a dime bag of, high sativa.
Yeah. But there is also an element of that that's good, which is that like, well, yeah, drug addiction should be treated as a health problem rather than a criminal problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Hunter Biden, for progressing our president.
For progressing our understanding of that. Smoked enough crack to move the U.S. forward on drug policy.
Really doing your country a service, and I mean that actually sincerely.
You know who else is doing our country a service, Carolina?
Brand?
The Sinaloa cartel, producers of the finest cocaine available. I literally never thought I would miss the
ratio of it until this exact episode.
No, we are pure Sinaloa these days. So curl up with a big fat bag of cocaine and listen to a podcast while sweating heavily.
Make a pipe out of your mother's vase.
Make a pipe out of anything. ABP, baby, always be piping. It's my motto.
Discover a spectacular island destination with crystal blue seas, endless sunshine, and the cool Bahamian breeze. Baha Mar, located in Nassau, Bahamas, offers your choice of 3 luxury hotels, over 45 fine dining and nightlife venues, John Baptiste's all-new jazz club, the Caribbean's most luxurious casino, and one-of-a-kind experiences for the entire family, like our 15-acre tropical water park, wildlife sanctuary, world-class golf course, and so much more. Visit bahamar.com today.
This is Jana Kramer from Wind Down with Jana Kramer. We talk a lot about cutting out toxicity in our lives, habits, jobs, relationships, but what about our skincare? So many of these anti-aging companies out there actually hide hundreds of chemicals under the term fragrance, exposing us to harmful carcinogens that actually break down your skin's protective barrier. Froya Organics is a Scandinavian skincare company that does things differently. They believe in healing skin at a microbial level, not just cheap fillers. They use wild, harvested Arctic botanicals like arnica and sea buckthorn. These plants survive extremely harsh winters, making them super resilient and hyper-packed with nutrients. They work with your skin to lock in moisture, boost collagen, and even repair your skin barrier, giving your skin a healthy radiance you can literally see and feel. And it actually works. 92% of users reported seeing less wrinkles and fine lines in just 4 weeks. It's time to stop using harsh chemicals and switch to natural ingredients that give your skin what it needs most. Go and check out FroyaOrganics.com today and get 40% off your order.
Hi, this is Joe Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back. Boy. So, drugs. So far, I've mostly criticized Blitzed, and it does deserve some criticism, but now we're about to get into what I think the book does very well, which is provide the first really thorough history of a fascinating figure, one of the few high-up Nazis to be mostly ignored by historians, Dr. Theodor Morell. In 1999, psychiatrist Fritz Redlich published a book titled Hitler, Diagnosis of a Destructive Prophet. It was an attempt to actually answer the question, what the fuck was going on with that dude, with this in a medical way, with as much scientific rigor. Yeah. What was going on with that guy? Yeah. In as much of a scientific way as you could for a patient who's, been dead for decades. He used written and oral statements by Hitler and his close associates to try and put together a picture of the Führer's health. Redlich's book relied heavily upon Dr. Theodor Morell's records. And I'm going to quote from the Psychiatric Times here. Before the outbreak of war in 1939, Hitler's complaints included insomnia, eczema, and GI discomfort. His health is known to have declined considerably starting in 1941. Redlich cited a host of ailments, including tinnitus, severe headaches, dizziness, impaired vision, abdominal spasms, impairments in motility, and, during the final year of the war, jaundice, laryngitis, runny nose, more bouts of GI spasms, tremor of his hands, and conspicuous difficulties in locomotion, evidence of Parkinson's disease. In 1945, his GI symptoms and tremors worsened, eventually leaving him unable to move around completely on his own. In treating these symptoms over the years, Morell prescribed for Hitler a cocktail of medications that included opiates, morphine, oxycodone, barbiturates, cocaine, amphetamines, and bromides. In the end, Redlich drew a conclusion that has been repeated frequently ever since. Hitler abused amphetamines, particularly between 1939 and 1943, and was temporarily impaired by such abuse. And this was probably the most Hitler diagnosis, probably the most popular and thorough look at Morell and Hitler's drug use prior to Ohler's work. And like Ohler's work, Redlich's book was heavily criticized. Experts noted that many of his sources were unreliable because, again, a lot of this is based on personal recollections of Nazis who survived the war, who are fundamentally untrustworthy people. And even more than that, they criticized Redlich for the fact that his emphasis on the Führer's drug abuse came close to excusing Hitler's crimes, which you obviously never want to do. And the same criticism is made of Blitzed. We'll see how we feel about that at the end of this. But right now, I think it's time to get into the meat of Ohler's work, which is his portrait of Dr. Morell and the relationship Hitler had with his primary physician. Here's how Ohler introduces Morell. Quote, The word Jew was smeared on the plaque of a doctor's surgery on Bayreutherstrasse in Berlin's Charlottenburg district one night in 1933. The name of the doctor, a specialist in dermatological and sexually transmitted diseases, was illegible. Only the opening hours could still be seen clearly. Weekdays 11 to 1 and 5 to 7, apart from Saturday afternoon. The overweight, bald Dr. Theodore Morel reacted to the attack in a way that was as typical as it was wretched. He quickly joined the Nazi Party to diffuse further hostilities of that kind. Morel was not a Jew. The SA had wrongly suspected him of being one because of his dark complexion. After he had registered as a party member, Morel's practice became even more successful. It expanded and moved into the lavish rooms of a 19th century building on the corner of Kurfürstendamm and Fasanenstrasse. Now, Morel was not at all unique in joining the Nazi Party to avoid, getting accused of being Jewish. Yeah, very common. He was one of, and again, not just for that reason, he was one of hundreds of thousands of German professionals who were what you would call apolitical Nazis. If the Nazi Party had never come around, they probably never would have done anything bad. They would have done whatever their fucking job is, right? But because being the best way to further their career or just make life easier was to join the Nazi Party, they joined the Nazi Party and thus played some role in the Holocaust. So as you might expect, Morel was not a great doctor. Again, STDs were kind of his primary area of expertise, but the thing that he really loved to focus on was the very new field of vitamins. Now, in the early 1900s, we'd figured out that vitamins were things and that you would die without them, but we did not know a whole lot more than that, right? Vitamins still a pretty new concept, that there's these things that if you don't get enough of them, your body stops working. Yeah. So there was an idea and we start to realize oh shit, vitamin C or potassium, you can feel immediate effects when you take some of this stuff like B12, right? And you can, especially if you're dealing with a deficiency, it's fucking quick. And so that convinces a lot of people that you can, if some of these can have such an immediate effect on people who are vitamin deficient, maybe taking shitloads of vitamins will make you superhuman, right? Just inject huge doses of them and you'll be, it's Joe Rogan-esque stuff, right?
It also reminds me of being 13 and having your friends eat a bunch of nutmeg. It's sort of let's see what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And like eating a bunch of nutmeg, taking shitloads of vitamins is a mixed bag and can make you poop a tremendous amount.
Shout out to vitamin C.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to vitamin C. So obviously vitamin injections can be powerful medicine, can save people's lives in certain circumstances, right? Incredible potential for malnourished people and in people with certain disorders. And also there are certain vitamin shots that if you're hungover and shit, you'll be oh fuck, I feel like a king right now, Now, the early 1900s was a time. So there is vitamin injections. That's not snake oil necessarily. That's not something that's even necessarily bad for you. But Morel marketed his vitamin injections in a way that, again, wouldn't have seemed out of place on a podcast ad today. He was, in short, a snake oil salesman, and he relied on the fact that vitamins were new and sexy to help him market them as performance enhancers. He had this thing called Vitamoltin, which was, he sold it in both bar form and in a shot that was basically this powerful vitamin injection that he eventually added a whole bunch of other stuff to. We'll talk about it. And again, because vitamins don't have a huge impact on people who are already well nourished, Morel at points would make the decision to mix real drugs and hormones into his vitamin shots. Because you want them to feel something immediately, right? Put a little amphetamine in there, Put a little bit of put some fucking testosterone in there, So he was doping people. It wasn't just vitamins. It was often steroids. It was or amphetamines and eventually just a shitload of everything he could get at caffeine. A lot of the time he would shoot caffeine in. It's kind of because again, if you're this guy, if someone's well nourished, just most vitamin shots, they're not going to feel anything. So shoot a bunch of caffeine in there too. They'll feel that. They'll feel something's going on. Oh shit, I'm powerful now.
It's a smart con move.
It's a smart
con. If you're telling someone that you are giving them vitamins, but really you're giving them a cup of coffee, it probably does feel like something's working.
Yeah. So for male patients, he often added in testosterone to act as an anabolic steroid. For female patients, he would include nightshade to help with energy and because he thought it made their eyes prettier. If that wasn't enough of a boost, he was not above using more powerful stimulants like methamphetamine. We'll talk about meth in more detail later, but the point is Morell's only true talent as a physician was marketing and the fact that he seems to have been really good at injecting people. There were folks who said you couldn't even feel him prick you with the needle. He was so good at what he did. Now, today's fascists are so obsessed with traditionalism that it's often forgotten that the OGs were futurists. Fascism was obsessed with machinery, with cutting-edge science, ultra-modern medical science. Fascism was a modern thing. They loved cars. They loved machine guns. They loved planes. Eugenics at the time was considered hip and exciting science.
And adopted from the States. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the eugenics and stuff. Sure. I mean, a decent amount of this was. And Morell's vitamin shots fit in well with the vibe of the early Nazi years. By 1936, he was one of the most prominent doctors in the Reich, and that's the year he got a phone call from Hitler's adjutant, asking him to make a house call for Heinrich Hoffmann, the Führer's official photographer. Hoffmann had contracted gonorrhea, and not from his wife. Since he was a prominent Nazi, the regime wanted to treat him in a hush-hush manner. Morell knew a lot about STDs and was able to treat the photographer easily. The Nazis were so grateful that they gave him and his wife a fancy trip to Venice as a thank you for his discretion. Afterwards, he was invited to dine with the Hoffmanns in Munich. Hitler showed up, and the group all ate the Nazi leader's favorite meal: spaghetti with nutmeg, tomato sauce on the side, and green salad. From Blitz, quote, yeah, Hitler's weird eater. Hitler, who had heard a great many good things about the jovial Morell, thanked him before dinner for treating his old comrade and regretted not having met the doctor before. Perhaps then his chauffeur, who had died of meningitis a few months earlier, would have still been alive. Morell reacted nervously for the compliment and barely spoke during the spaghetti dinner. The constantly sweating doctor with the full face and the thick round glasses on his potato nose knew that in higher circles he was not considered socially acceptable. His only chance of acceptance lay in his injections, so he pricked up his ears when Hitler, in the course of the evening, talked almost in passing about severe stomach and intestinal pains that had been tormenting him for years. Morell hastily mentioned an unusual treatment that might prove successful. Hitler looked at him quizzically and invited Morell and his wife to further consultations at the Berghof, his mountain retreat in the Obersalzberg near Berchtesgaden. There, a few days later, during a private conversation, the dictator frankly admitted to Morell that his health was now so poor that he could barely perform any action. That was, he claimed, due to the bad treatment given to him by his previous doctors, who couldn't come up with anything but starving him. Then, if there happened to be an abundant dinner on the program, which was often the case, he immediately suffered from unspeakable bloating and itchy eczema on both legs, so that he had to walk around with bandages around his feet and couldn't wear boots. Morell immediately thought he recognized the cause of Hitler's complaints and diagnosed abnormal bacterial flora, causing poor digestion. Now, we don't know exactly what was wrong with Hitler at this point, like medically. In the mid-aughts, historian Heinrich Eberl and physician Hans Joachim Neumann attempted to diagnose the Führer's physical maladies, and I'm going to quote from the Psychiatric Times here. While the German chancellor appears to have not suffered from any major acute illnesses, he was a victim of chronic diseases. Neumann and Eberl confirmed that Hitler's long-standing ailments were GI in nature. There were also signs in medical records of progressive coronary sclerosis and high blood pressure. Most prominently, however, Neumann and Eberl confirmed the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, which really started in the early 1940s. So he's got eczema and he's got something on his GI that gives him this, and this is his main complaint. He has this horrific, debilitating gas pain. His gas is so bad that he can't function a lot of the time when he eats. Some of this is probably exacerbated by his vegetarian diet. He probably had IBS as a result of his time in the trenches. You talk about people particularly who were over in Iraq and Afghanistan earlier in those wars before there was as much infrastructure on the U.S. side. Nearly all of them have some sort of IBS. It's just something you get when you're in trenches, the water's dirty and stuff. There's a number of things that are probably going on with Hitler. But it is likely right that he had something going wrong with his bacterial flora, perhaps because of his injuries during the war or something. But we now know that
maybe because all the shitty food he eats.
Yeah, all the bad food he eats. Gut bacteria have a big impact on your health. And that was starting to be understood then. It's still kind of a primitive science now, comparatively. And Morell prescribed his leaders something called Mutaflor. This was a gut bacteria supplement. It had actually been crafted from the intestinal flora of a German soldier who'd been sent to the Balkans during World War I and had been the only guy in his unit not to get horrible stomach issues. And that's actually a really good medical thing. It's that guy seems let's get the shit out of his guts and give it to other people, And Mutaflor was live bacteria in capsules taken with the hope that they'd set up permanent shop in the patient's bowels. This was real medicine, and its impact on Hitler's GI tract was apparently powerful and quick. Hitler experienced immediate relief, although not permanent relief, so I don't know exactly what was going on here. But he was so overjoyed to be cured, as he felt at the time, that he gave Morell a house and made him his personal physician. But Morell wasn't a gut bacteria specialist. He was a vitamin man. Hitler still had health complaints, and a lot of them were probably due to permanent injuries caused by his service and the fact that he was just an aging man, in a time when medicine wasn't very good. So Morell was able to convince his new boss that vitamins were the answer. You're not tired because you're pushing 50 and you have been, going without sleep and working like a crazy person, and like you were injured and suffered permanent damage in a war. You're tired because you need these vitamin injections that are also full of caffeine or sometimes amphetamines, So he was basically like, you can't, like you need vitamins, and because vitamin pills take too long and your schedule is so demanding, I've just got to start shooting you up every time before a speech in order to like get you hyped up.
Get you going, yeah.
Yeah. And Morell starts giving Hitler shots, and he never stops until the very end of the war. And he would put a wide variety of substances into the Nazi leader's veins: iodine, vitamins, chalk, and when Hitler had a big speech, a power injection, which often contained glucose to give him a boost of sugar-fueled energy, probably caffeine also a lot of the time. Morell's immediate goal was an instant cessation of symptoms. So if you're tired, he wants you to feel wired right away, And to that end, he continually experimented and tweaked the injections he was giving Hitler. We don't always know what they included, because sometimes Morell I gave him, shot number whatever, and it's like, okay, well, what the fuck was in that? And Oehler does a lot of good work to try to diagnose it. A lot of times that aren't recorded, there's probably some, if not amphetamine, then at least caffeine in these things. We don't always know. We do know that in 1937, the Nazi leader lost his voice before a big speech, and Morell gave him an injection of something that is said to have cured him immediately. Like, who knows what the fuck he was shooting into the guy?
He didn't lip sync?
Yeah, just tell Hitler to lip sync. Yeah. Soon Morell was so indispensable to the Fuhrer that he was forced to let his medical practice shrivel up from lack of attention. Hitler couldn't let him be away from him, right? He needed him kind of available on call at all time. Hitler was an all-consuming patient, but he rewarded Dr. Morell well, making him a wealthy man. In 1938, he gave his doctor an honored professorship. For his part, Morell kept looking for new substances to shoot into Hitler's body. The 1936 Olympics had seen the advent of the use of benzodrine, which is classic speed. When your parents talk about doing speed in the 70s, that's bennies, baby. Yeah. You can still get it today if you get a Benzodrex inhaler. They're the little allergy inhalers. You just make sure that they say Benzodrine on them. You pop them open. You take the little cotton cloth out, throw it in a water bottle. You're good to go.
You'll kill it.
Allegedly.
Tap dance.
Allegedly. Yeah. So yeah, Benzodrine gets big after the 36 Olympics, and a German pharmaceutical company makes a note of this. They're like, well, seems like people love speed. We should develop a better speed. And the chemical they picked to make an even better speed was a little substance you might have heard about. It was first synthesized in 1919 by Japanese chemists, and its name was N-methylamphetamine.
Oh.
It's the good shit. That's
the good shit.
The
Protect your teeth from it.
Shit. Yeah, baby. Meth. Speaking of drugs with no downsides. So in short order, Timler was producing methamphetamine pills as an over-the-counter medication under the brand named Pervitin. And sales started in the winter of 1937, and the drug was immediately popular among the young Third Reich users, and the drug was immediately popular in the young Third Reich. Soon, Timler was even selling boxes of meth spiked chocolate. They bragged that their wonder drug was good for, quote, reawakening joy in the despondent, and that frigidity in women can be easily influenced with Pervitin tablets. Give a girl some meth and she'll want to get down, Yeah. You can just put that on a box and sell it.
What probably missing is meth.
When it's all legal, I hope to be an ad man for the methamphetamine industry. It's so easy to sell.
It can help with chemistry. Yeah.
Yeah.
A few ads like that
can help.
Cosmo.
If you and your wife been fighting, fight faster on meth,
Exactly.
So I'm going to continue to read from Timler's ads for Pervitin. The treatment technique is as simple as can be imagined. 4 half tablets every day, long before bedtime, 10 days a month for 3 months. This will achieve excellent results by increasing women's libido and sexual power. Take meth every day to fuck better.
Meth, I'm almost positive, would not help me get laid. I mean, that when I smoked pot in college, I would perpetually ruin dates by avoiding the person I was sitting next to. I literally in college smoked weed once with this guy who I was like getting set up with. Didn't speak to him at all. Was like, I need to go home. Apologized to him. The next time I saw him, I was like, hey, John, I'm so sorry about that. That was so weird. I would love to just like see if we could do this again. And he said, thank you so much for apologizing. What did we do on our next date? Smoke weed together. I was like, I've got to leave again. So sorry. And that was the end of our short-lived relationship. So I feel like if meth was added, it wouldn't help the situation, is what I'm saying.
I mean, there's only one way to find out, which is track that guy down and just rail a fuckload of crystal.
Only if they put it in chocolate, and I want them in those little Roche
little Roche chocolates.
Yeah.
I would like one, there's like those chocolate cherries, a little cherry in the middle of the chocolate thing.
Yeah, that like kind of texture.
With a little rock of crystal meth right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
Nice.
That's the surprise. Or maybe like those little eggs they make. Those Kinder eggs.
Cadbury. Oh, I was thinking Cadbury eggs.
Instead of like building a toy inside, you smoke meth.
Just a fuckload of meth-filled Cadbury eggs. God, that would be rad. Allegedly. So methamphetamine was even useful in treating drug addicts. Again, this is according to the company selling meth. They advised,
really good tote bag.
They advised people withdrawing from alcohol, cocaine, or heroin to take a little meth to help them get over the shakes. Meth was so like, trying to get off of heroin. It'll clean you up. A little bit of methamphetamine.
Can you pronounce this? Yeah. Then you're ready to take it.
Oh, yeah. Cocaine's bad stuff. Take this meth. Clean you right out. So again, the reason I bring all this up is to point out that like meth was not a drug in the Third. It wasn't seen as a drug in the Third Reich. It was just seen as like a medicine, particularly like a treatment for anything. It was a helper. It was not a recreational substance. It was advertised as capable of bringing, quote, shirkers, malingerers, defeatists, and whiners into the Nazi fold and turning them into productive, obedient citizens. They were saying like meth will help turn you into a good Nazi. You'll be able to work if you're lazy because you'll be on meth. One and again, that's also, you could draw a line to like why they were advertising that it makes women want to fuck is like, well, it's all about breeding, right? Like meth is the drug that helps you work in a factory or get laid and make babies, like that's why they're selling it the way they're selling it, or a big part of it. One pharmacologist, Felix Hafner, called prescribing Pervitin the new supreme commandment of his discipline in Germany. He was saying, like, if you're a pharmacist, it's your duty to give Germans meth. He called it he said that it could bring chemical order to disordered people. Now, we don't know when precisely Morell first gave Hitler methamphetamine. The bad doctor had often he had like different brand names for his various injections. And while some of his notes were detailed, this wasn't always the case. It's likely that Hitler started taking meth in a couple of different forms, potentially in the late 1930s, as he'd often complained of a lack of energy. And by 1938 and 1939, Pervitin was incredibly popular among German civilians. So the fact that Hitler's taking amphetamines during this period of time was not odd. It wasn't something unique to him. It was something that made him very much normal among like the German working class in this period. That said, it was not something that was widely publicized. Hitler's reputation was he was a sober man and he didn't drink, which was weird. Like he was not a guy who drank a lot. He didn't really smoke. He had this reputation for being indefatigable, almost superhuman, and this was a big part of his appeal. So they didn't want to like talk about the fact that he was as drugged up as everybody else. Historians Stephen Snelders and Toyn Peters called Nazi Germany after 1938 a methamphetamine dictatorship. And when they say that, they don't mean that Hitler was a meth dictator, although he was a dictator on meth. I'm going to quote from Psychiatric Times to get to what they're saying here. Rather than emphasizing the role of the suppliers, however, they argue that the evidence shows strong demand pressures for the drug from consumers. In clinical practice, the drug was first used to treat psychological inhibition and endogenous depression and to augment what was referred to as the will to get healthy. Pervitin quickly moved from clinical to general practice and was prescribed fairly commonly for employees, workers, and housewives. In fact, a praline chocolate with 14 milligrams of Pervitin was marketed to the general public. So it's a meth dictatorship because everyone is on meth. They're on meth to deal with their depression, their anxiety, like the fact that it's a bummer living in Nazi Germany. They're on meth to deal with the fact that like they have to like the work schedules, like the production they're trying to do.
To go on dates.
Meth is in a way the dictator, to go on dates to make enough babies.
Incredible. Nice.
And this is one of those things where I don't think Oehler is really guilty of this, but I think that people kind of interpreting his work have made way too much of Hitler's amphetamine use. And rather than put it in the context of like, no, all of the Nazis were on a fuckload of speed, and that is relevant, and it impacted their behavior. It impacted history in a significant way. But it's not that like Hitler was on meth and made crazy decisions. It was that the whole Third Reich was in the late 30s and early 40s very methamphetamine dependent, and that's kind of important to note. Now, it's tempting to speculate as to which of Hitler's temper tantrums and rages were influenced by meth use. I'm going to avoid that temptation. It is impossible to know, and while meth certainly had an impact on his behavior, that impact was more to exacerbate the kind of rages he'd always engaged in. Hitler even used Morel to dose another head of state, Czech President Emil Hácha, during a crucial moment. In March of 1939, Hitler was trying to negotiate over the annexation of Czechoslovakia. It was crucial that the smaller country just sort of hand themselves over without fighting, because Germany actually couldn't have successfully invaded Czechoslovakia. They were kind of bluffing here. Hácha was ill when he attended a state visit to the Reichschancellery, where Hitler demanded he order the surrender of Czech troops. Hácha suffered a heart attack, which rendered him unable to function. And I'm going to quote from Blitzed here next. Hitler urgently summoned Morel, who hurried along with his case and his syringes and injected the unconscious foreign guest with such a stimulating medication that Hácha rose again within seconds, as if from the dead. He signed the piece of paper that sealed the temporary end of his state. The very next morning, Hitler invaded Prague without a fight. During the following years, Hácha sat the powerless head of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, to which parts of his country had been reduced, remaining Morel's loyal patient. In that respect, pharmacology worked as a way of continuing politics by other means. And
this reminds me a lot of a girl in New York who once went down a K-hole, and everyone was worried that she was going unconscious until Carly Rae Jepsen's song Call Me Maybe came on, and then she shot up back from the dead.
Hey, that song is morally identical to dosing someone with methamphetamine. I've always said that. I've always said that. Now, the annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia pretty much went off perfectly for Hitler, but his next goal, the conquest of Poland, was going to require actual, war stuff. The Fuhrer and his general staff all had clear, terrible memories of the First World War, and they wanted more than anything to avoid a repeat of the bloody stalemates of the Western Front. The German war machine developed several solutions to this problem. One of the major reasons that allowed them to that was crucial behind Blitzkrieg was small unit stormtrooper tactics that had started being developed near the end of the First World War. The term the Germans used for this was Auftragstaktik. And it was heavily, we'll talk about this a bit more later, but it was heavily based around allowing a lot of unit autonomy. There's this myth that the Nazi soldiers were these automatons who followed orders unquestioningly. The reason why the Blitzkrieg worked is that individual small unit leaders were given a degree of personal discretion and choice and power to make decisions in the field that no other military in the world gave them at this point. And that's a big part of why they were successful. The Blitzkrieg was also crucially relied on the fact that the Germans had built up a significant amount of armored cars, tanks, and close air support craft to enable a speedier sort of mechanized warfare. And as all of this developed, an idea developed, championed by men like General Heinz Guderian, that this new German army might be able to move quickly enough to avoid the static fortifications that had bogged them down in 1914. But technology and tactics only went so far. Poland was huge, and war with Poland meant war with France. In order to have a hope of sweeping through either country, German soldiers were going to need chemical assistance, and Pervitin was just just what the Doctor General ordered. From a write-up in Time magazine, quote, Dr. Otto F. Rank, director of the Research Institute of Defense Physiology, had high hopes that Pervitin would prove advantageous on the battlefield. His goal was to defeat the enemy with chemically enhanced soldiers who could give Germany a military edge by fighting harder and longer than their opponents. After testing the drug on a group of medical officers, Rank believed that Pervitin would be an excellent substance for rousing a weary squad. We may grasp what far-reaching military significance it would have if we managed to remove the natural tiredness using medical methods. Rank himself was a daily user, as detailed in his wartime medical diary and letters. Quote, with Pervitin, you can go on working for 36 to 50 hours without feeling any noticeable fatigue. This allowed Rank to work days at a time with no sleep, and his correspondence indicated, yeah.
Is this an ad?
It is an ad for again, primary sponsor of the show, methamphetamine, under a bridge near
also
you.
No. And Pervitin.
Mm-hmm. You can cook it in your bathtub if you really want, or wherever.
That's so sad.
It's safe. Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, so we're going to talk more about all of this in part 2, but that's going to do it for us in part 1. Carolina, how are you feeling? Has this changed your mind on meth at all?
Okay, I'm really starting to look at my dating history, and I'm realizing a missing puzzle piece.
Methamphetamine.
Methamphetamine. And maybe just like the super vitamin shot of chalk.
Chalk. You can't get enough
coffee,
chalk.
Glucose, and whatever, human growth hormone, whatever else he was throwing in there.
I think it's fair to say a lot of us have been looking for love in all the wrong places. And maybe the right place is crystal meth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. When you're on meth, every day is Valentine's Day. That's the beauty of meth.
That's so true.
That's so true.
That's so true.
Carolina, do you have anything other than methamphetamine you want to plug?
I would love to plug my show, True Romance, where we discuss dating horrors and recovering from anything from an episode of The Bachelorette to a terrible first date to a truly devastating breakup. We're here for you every Thursday. There's a new episode on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And on our next episode, I will be trying meth and going on a blind date.
Yeah.
Literally blind. I will be blacked out.
And on all our next episodes, I think we'll be on meth too. Sophie, can we get a line item in the budget for just like a shitload of meth?
Come on, Sophie.
Come on, Sophie.
Come on. This question.
Well,
but off the record.
Off the record, we're absolutely gonna do some meth. Excellent. All right. Good news, everybody. Well, this has been Behind the Bastards. Methamphetamine is actually based edition.
Listen to It Could Happen Here. It's now daily, and it's on the same podcast app you're listening to.
Maybe if I was racked as hell,
Stop
Sophie,
lobbying for this. Stop it. That's the episode. Bye-bye.
All right. That's the episode.
Discover a spectacular island destination with crystal blue seas, endless sunshine, and the cool Bahamian breeze. Baha Mar, located in Nassau, Bahamas, offers your choice of 3 luxury hotels, over 45 fine dining and nightlife venues, John Baptiste's all-new jazz club, the Caribbean's most luxurious casino, and one-of-a-kind experiences for the entire family, like our 15-acre tropical water park, wildlife sanctuary, world-class golf course, and so much more. Visit bahamar.com today.
A BetterHelp ad. We get it. February is full of flowers, candy, and, of course, lots of talk about relationships. It can feel like everyone else has it all together in their love lives. But the truth is, we're all still figuring it out. Whether you're working on your marriage, navigating the dating apps, or prioritizing staying single, no matter where you are, you're right on time. Therapy can help you find your way and take some of the pressure off yourself so you can determine what you want, what feels heavy, and how you can feel lighter. Just a little bit of outside perspective from a professional can lead to new understanding and a lot of progress. So the next time you're feeling iffy about your love life, try therapy with BetterHelp and see where it takes you. And remember, you're right on time. Visit BetterHelp.com for 10% off. That's BetterHelp.com.
This is Jana Kramer from Wind Down with Jana Kramer. We talk a lot about cutting out toxicity in our lives, but what about our skincare? So many of these anti-aging companies hide hundreds of chemicals under the term fragrance, exposing us to harmful carcinogens that actually damage our skin. Foria Organics is completely different. They use natural Arctic ingredients like arnica that lock in moisture, boost collagen, and repair your skin's protective barrier, giving you a radiant natural glow at any age. Stop using harsh products that work against your skin instead of with it. Visit ForiaOrganics.com today.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.